Caves are one of the toughest objectives in Ark, and there's over 50 of them in the game that all present unique challenges. With Ark Ascended releasing soon, there's no better time to be ready for this aspect of the game. In this video, I'll rank the 20 best caving creatures in Ark. My criteria includes how versatile a creature is at tackling different types of caves. This includes if a creature can go underwater, can jump for parkour caves, and if the creature can actually fit into a sizable amount of the caves, how strong a creature's abilities are, and how good the stats and durability of the creature is. I'll use accessibility as a tiebreaker, but it's really not that important for this ranking because the caves are more late game content anyway. By the end of this video, you'll know how to turn this challenging part of the game into a piece of cake. This list applies to both PvP and PvE and includes creatures from both ASA and ASE, so you'll need some of these tames regardless of how you play Ark. Without further ado, let's get into it. At number 20, I have the Raptor. In terms of strength, the Raptor has a high jump, is fast, is an early game tame, and can pounce on smaller creatures. To emphasize just how early in the game you can get a good Raptor, you can get the level unlock at level 16 for the saddle, which is by far the lowest in this list. It doesn't come with a great HP pool, so it's not durable enough for tougher caves, but if you're trying to run through early game caves, this is a great choice. In comparison to other creatures on this list, it's definitely one of the least durable ones, but it does come with a saddle, which is a slight boost. The downsides are really the lack of high stats, including a weak melee damage stat that makes it really bad for burning through a lot of creatures in caves. And the biggest positive for it is that it's really accessible and it's fast enough to blitz through a lot of the early game easy caves. At number 19, I have the Carno. The Carno's biggest strength is its really good bleed effect, its decent damage, and its good stats. The Carno's bleed effect is really good, but the only downside for it is that it doesn't stack. You can use the headbutt multiple times when a creature is already bleeding just to reset that timer, but it never stacks, so it's not super overpowered. This is important because the best caves for Carno use is something like the Ice Cave on the island where there's a lot of really strong creatures in there. Obviously, if you're an Ark Evolved and you're trying to do the Ice Cave with the Carno, you're going to have to use a cryopod to get the Carno in there, but that's the case with any creature because it's a crouch cave. In Ark Ascended though, they did remove that crouch portion so you can just run straight in. It's really good for that cave because you do need a powerhouse creature to run through it. There's a lot of really strong and tanky direwolves, polar bears, and yetis in there, so you really do need to be careful. If the bleed effect did stack, it would be an excellent choice for this, but it's still okay. The Carno's pretty easily accessible too. It's not the easiest tame in the world because they're pretty strong, but once you have a decent crossbow and you have a decent setup, it's really easy to tame. Its saddle unlock is at level 46 too, which is relatively early in the game, especially for how strong the Carno is. You're not really going to run caves super early in the game anyway, so this pretty much means the Carno is usable for every cave that you're able to fit it into. The big issue for the Carno is when there's a low roof in a cave. There's a lot of caves in the game that have low roofs that aren't crouch caves, so you can fit certain creatures in, but not the Carno. But yeah, the Carno stats are good. It's small enough to fit into certain caves, but the biggest downsides for it are that it's too big for a lot of the caves in the game, and it can't jump, so it can't do any cave that requires parkour. At number 18, I have the Terror Bird. The strengths for the Terror Bird all revolve around its mobility. It has a glide ability which makes it not take any fall damage and can make it travel far distances above all the danger. It has a really high movement speed, and it's very small so it can fit into basically any cave that allows creatures. It doesn't have a very good health stat at all, being barely tankier than a Raptor, and its abilities beside its gliding ability and high speed are pretty much non-existent. It's good for early game caves, it's good for parkour caves where you can just jump around and move really quickly, but the weak damage output and the bad HP just make it a not optimal choice. On the bright side, it's very easily accessible and it's pretty fun to use, so definitely try it out. It's also very good for running turret walls inside of caves, but that's not super relevant to this video because it's a bit off topic. At number 17, I have the Tuzo Toothus. The Tuzo is extremely strong, it has the best stats in this video by a mile, it has the best HP in this video by a mile, and its damage is incredible. It can grab small and large enemies, it's immune to stuns, and it's just the strongest underwater creature in Ark by a mile, making it easily the best for underwater caves for the caves that it can fit into. I'm not exaggerating when I say the Tuzo is essentially an unkillable behemoth, it's just not good in a wide enough variety of caves to be higher than 17th. Yet again, if you're using cryopods and you can get the Tuzo into every single cave, go for it, it's definitely the best choice. But if you're not in a PvE server, you just can't fit the Tuzo into a majority of the underwater caves. It's also pretty hard to tame. The saddle requirement's level 91, which is not great just because a lot of these caves you do get done before level 91. And there's obviously the downside of it only being usable in water caves. I can't dock it too much for that just because it's an underwater creature, but it just has a ceiling of how high it can go on the list. There's only a select few water caves in the game, and most of the caves in Ark are on land, so it's just not a great option. But in terms of sheer power, the Tuzo is hard to beat. At number 16, I have the Capro. The Capro can grab smaller creatures in its mouth, has a giant lunge ability which lets it travel far distances and lets it do parkour caves, and has a really small hitbox so it can fit into basically every cave. The capper really shines because of its versatility. It's able to swim pretty quickly, so you're good for underwater caves, and you can even go faster by chain jumping. And on land, you can also use the chain jumping to go through easy caves and just skip past a lot of the threats, and this makes it pretty good for the parkour caves. With all the pros out of the way, there are some serious issues with the capper that keep it from being higher on the list. First of all, its stats are horrible, its damage is not great, and its HP pool is the worst out of all 20 creatures in this video. It also gets stunned by eels and jellyfish, so it's not as good in the underwater caves as other options. On top of it being able to get stunned, which is a big issue, it's also not fast enough to avoid certain threats like the Zipactinus or the eels, so even though it is a decent swimmer, it's not great for the hard underwater caves. And maybe the biggest issue out of all of them for the capper besides its HP pool is that it floats to the surface when you dismount it. This is a massive issue because if it floats away from you as you're trying to get a drop or an artifact and a dangerous creature comes by, you're screwed. If you don't get screwed by it jumping you in the wild, it is a pretty easy tame, and the saddle's unlocked at level 39, so it is available in the early game. If it had better stats, its versatility would make it one of the best cave creatures in the game, but it simply doesn't hold up on tougher caves. Over the next week, my Discord is hosting giveaways for whatever Ark content the winner wants. Ark Ascended, Ark Evolved, or any DLCs for either game on any platform is fair game, so check it out in the first link in the description for a chance of winning. While you're down there, I'd really appreciate you subbing and liking the video to help the channel out. Thanks! At number 15, I have the Basilosaurus. The Basilosaurus is, in my opinion, the best underwater caving option in the game. It's immune to jellyfish and eels, it's extremely strong, it's insanely tanky, basically unkillable underwater. It's small enough to fit into every single underwater cave in the game, and the only tankier alternative that you could use that is immune to stuns is the Tuzo, which yet again doesn't really fit into enough caves to be higher than 17. The Basilosaurus is also extremely easy to tame in comparison to the Tuzo, and you get the saddle at level 60 as opposed to level 91. The obvious downside for the Basilo is that it can't do land caves because it is an underwater creature, so it does have a ceiling on this ranking yet again, but it's definitely the best underwater caving option. The only slight downside for the Basilo in terms of strength is that its damage output isn't amazing and it doesn't have a great AoE around it, so if you have Zipactinus behind you, it's pretty annoying to kill them. The easy solution to this is just bringing a couple of Zipactinus or Megalodons with you in a pack. These kill everything around you and you can just tank everything else. I've never died when on the back of a Basilosaurus in PvE. It's basically impossible to die as long as you stay on the back of it, and it's been my go-to for the past 10 years. I absolutely love this thing. At number 14, I have the Sabertooth. The Sabertooth is fast, has a good jump, and the rider can use weapons on the back of it while it has a small hitbox, so it's a very good choice. The biggest downside for the Sabertooth is easily its low HP and its small height. You might think the small head is really good, but in this case, it does kind of hinder you in some situations. For example, it's pretty hard to kill Onyx with a Sabertooth. Usually something like a jumping creature, for example, a raptor, a Thyla, they can just jump pretty high in the air and kill the Onyx. But with Sabertooth specifically, the jump is very horizontal, so you don't really get enough air to actually kill Onyx. This means you basically always have to bring lesser antidote with you when you're running a cave with a Sabertooth. And the low HP pool and small hitbox mean you pretty much can't run any cave with strong defensive creatures. For example, if there's Megalosaurus in the cave, or even something like dire wolves, dire bears, or yetis. Megalosaurus especially is a hard counter to the Sabertooth because it can just grab your Sabertooth and then you are dead. On the bright side, it's very easily accessible. When you're chain jumping, it's one of the fastest creatures in the game, and you can avoid a lot of its weaknesses by just bringing a shotgun and using it while you're on the back of the Sabertooth. The saddle is unlocked at level 37, so you're basically always going to have a Sabertooth available to you when you're trying to run caves. Its swim speed is also pretty good compared to most of the creatures on this list that are land creatures, so if you're running one of those terrestrial caves that have an underwater section, this is a decent choice for that as well. At number 13, I have the Megalania. The Megalania is easily the most unique creature on this list, so it's hard to rank it, but I think 13 works. It's a very versatile cave option because it can climb on walls and ceilings to avoid threats, has a small hitbox, and has surprisingly good stats for how small it is. It can also fit into pretty much every single cave in the game, which is a nice touch. One more ability that Megalania has is that it can inflict torpor damage, but in this situation for caving, it's not that useful. Although climbing around and avoiding all the threats does sound good in concept, there's some issues that make it just not the best choice. First of all, for any cave that has Onyx in it, you need to bring lesser antidote because you're gonna get hit. This thing does not deal with Onyx very well at all. Secondly, if you run out of stamina while you're on the ceiling and you fall into a pit of enemy creatures, you're gonna die. The stats aren't good enough on this thing, and the damage output is definitely not good enough to plow through a lot of enemies. And thirdly, it's horrible underwater, so any cave that has any underwater portion, this thing is basically a no-go. The best caves for this are caves that descend. For example, the new lava cave on Astraeos is extremely effective to use a Megalania for because you can just climb on the roof and then drop down for the artifact. It's really good for that cave, especially because you can climb over all these dangerous threats and not have to deal with any of them. You just need to make sure that you have a lot of stamina on it because if you drop, yet again, you are screwed. The other downside for it is that it's slightly annoying to tame just because it's only really easily accessible on Ragnarok on that one charcoal beach. And the saddle level requirement is level 73, so it's not a super early game option. I've heard people say this is one of the best caving options in the game, and I think it's very overrated in that sense. There's just too many things holding it back for it to be much higher on the list than 13 for me, but it's definitely decent. At number 12, I have the Direwolf. The Direwolf has a really good pack buff, is fast, maneuverable, and has okay stats. Its HP pool is pretty solid, but there's one huge issue with the Direwolf. It doesn't come with a saddle. Before I explain why lacking and having a saddle is so bad, let's get into the positives first. The pack buff is really good. It gives you a plus 5% melee damage and damage resistance buff per direwolf in the pack, and it caps out at plus 4, which means if you have 5 or more direwolves in the pack, you'll get a 20% buff to melee damage and damage resistance, which is really solid. It's extremely fast and it's able to jump, so you can do parkour caves with it. It's a little bit bigger than the small caving option, so you can't fit it into every cave, but you can fit it into a majority of the caves in the game, and its damage output is really solid. It also gives you an insulation boost for both hypothermic and hyperthermic insulation. And even though the Direwolf doesn't have a saddle, it does have a 40% damage reduction for free, which is still worse than a primitive saddle by 10%, but at least it's something. On screen now, you can see how saddles scale throughout the game, and it's way better than 40%. Even if you get the full pack bonus, it's still nowhere near as good as saddles. The reason not having a saddle is so bad though is that there's no scaling. If you're using a primitive saddle on every creature, you're not really missing out on much resistance for the Direwolf. But if you're using a capped saddle, you can get up to an 80% damage resistance on your creature, and a Direwolf simply will never have that much resistance. On top of its not great HP, it's just not durable enough for tough caves. It's a really badass option. It's pretty easy to tame once you get into the snow biome, and it's easy to use throughout the entire game because no saddle crafting level requirement, so you can use it whenever you tame it. But it just falls off in tougher caves, so there's better options. At number 11, I have the Dire Bear. The Dire Bear's strengths include its really great stats, its insanely good insulation bonus, the fact that you can use weapons on the back of it, and its top speed being incredibly fast. The Dire Bear is not that big of a creature and fits into way more caves than you'd expect, and compared to other creatures of its size, it's a bit tankier and does way more damage. It's not the easiest creature to tame in the world because it spawns in the redwoods primarily, but the saddle's only at level 45, so if you do get one, you can use it for pretty much the entire game. The downsides for it are that it's bigger than some creatures and doesn't fit into every single cave. It can't jump, and its fast speed is good, but you have to charge it up, so sometimes it's hard to get there. There's a lot of obstacles in caves, including enemies and just random structures or narrow passageways that do prevent you from getting to top speed pretty often. So that high speed ability really isn't designed for cave traveling, but the thing is just way too strong not to include here. Besides parkour caves and caves that include water, it's just a great choice. At number 10, I have the Beelzebufo. The strength for the Beelzebufo is that it jumps very high, it easily avoids attacks because the jump is so ridiculous, it's relatively fast, especially if you're chain jumping, it has a ridiculously small hitbox so it fits into every single cave that you can fake creatures into, and it inflicts torpor damage with its tongue, and it gets you a lot of cementing paste while you're killing bugs. The biggest issue for the frog is that its health stat is extremely low. It's the lowest on this list by a pretty decent margin. This makes it really only viable for early and mid-game caves. It's a really easy tame. You can get the saddle for it at level 40 once you find one in the swamp. And if you use it properly, you can basically avoid all threats in most caves by just jumping around them. You can also use the large AoE to avoid getting hit by a lot of things while you're killing them. But yet again, for caves that have super strong enemies, you need to be very good with using this thing if you don't want to die. Half the reason why the Beelzebufo is so good is because you can use it very effectively underwater as well. It's an excellent swimmer. And even though it can get stunned by jellyfish and eels, it's way too fast to have to worry about that. It easily outswims those two. My biggest issue with the Beelzebufo, besides its low HP, is that it does take some fall damage when you're using it, so just be careful. It does take reduced fall damage, but its HP pool is really low, so you will notice it if you don't be careful at all. The Beelzebufo is also a really good cave creature because it farms cementing paste directly from bugs, so caves that have bugs in them are really good to run with Beelzebufos, so you get both the cementing paste and drops from those caves. If it had a better HP stat, it would be top 3. At number 9, I have the Ravager. The Ravager has a lot of strengths. It can climb on zip lines, jumps extremely high, is really fast, has an insanely good pack buff, and is extremely accessible because it spawns everywhere in the green zone on Aberration, and the saddle is at level 47, so you can get it really easily. The biggest issue for the Ravager is that the tamed version doesn't get the Nash debuff that the wild one gets. If it had this, it would be insanely OP. The thing is small enough to fit into basically every cave in the game. It's exceptionally good for the Aberration caves as long as you avoid Megalosaurus. The Megalosaurus can grab you and then you are in some serious trouble. But if you avoid those, this is excellent for both parkour caves, Aberration caves, and it's even okay for caves that have some underwater sections with most of it being land because it's not a terrible swimmer. My recommendation is bringing a pack of Ravagers into any cave that you're running with it. Getting the pack buff makes this one of the strongest options for caves in the entire game. It also takes out a lot of the room for error because, for example, if you get hit with a Megalosaurus that grabs you, you can just hop on another one of the Ravagers that are around you instead of just being dead. If it had the Gnashed debuff or it had slightly better stats, I think it would be much higher on the list, but it just doesn't have those options, so the damage output isn't insanely good, and it's not good enough in terms of tankiness to be in the top 5. At number 8, I have the Megalosaurus. The Megalosaurus' biggest strength is its stats. It's insanely tanky and does ridiculously good damage while being able to pick up smaller creatures. It's the most durable land creature on this list by a pretty decent margin, and it has a decent speed to top off its insane damage and health. Literally the only downside for the Megalosaurus is that it's too big for certain caves. It's an extremely slow swimmer, so if you're going to use it in a cave that has underwater portions, you better be able to kill every single enemy that's underwater, and it can't jump, so you can't use it for parkour caves. For the aberration caves especially, where it's always on its full power mode, you're pretty much never going to find a better option to run those caves than the Megalosaurus. It spawns on the entirety of the outskirts of the green biome and the entire blue zone as well, and the saddle requirement is only level 57, so you can use it for every single cave that is able to fit into pretty easily. If it excelled on other maps like it does on Aberration, where it's buffed the entire time and it actually had a smaller hitbox so it could fit in every cave, it would easily be in the top 5. It's incredibly strong and incredibly durable, it's just not versatile enough. At number 7, I have the Megatherium. The Megatherium's biggest strength comes from its insect killer buff, which it gets from killing any bug. This increases its melee damage for 120 seconds, and it makes it an absolute monster. Its stats are already pretty good, it's extremely tanky, it does good damage naturally, and it has a pretty good movement speed as well. Megatheriums are really easy to find, they spawn all over the redwoods and occasionally in other areas, and they're an easy knockout tame with a saddle requirement of level 52. The issues for the Megatherium include it being one of the biggest land creatures on this list, and it not being great in underwater situations, so it's very similar to the Megalosaurus in terms of strengths and weaknesses. The reason I side with the Megatherium over the Megalosaurus slightly is because the Megatherium is good day round on any single map, while the Megalosaurus is only good during the nighttime or on Aberration. The Megatherium with the insect killer buff is also a lot stronger than the Megalosaurus because there's not many creatures in the game that are actually stronger than the Megatherium when it's in this mode. The other reason that I put the Megatherium just slightly higher than the Megalosaurus is because even though its jump isn't great, it does technically have one, so you could bring it into some parkour caves. With that being said, I really don't recommend bringing this into parkour caves, just the fact that it's able to do it put it above the Megalosaurus for me. At number 6, I have the Cinemacrops. The Cinemacrops can fly, glide, hover, and easily avoid big chokeholds in caves, but all of those things do not compare to its biggest strength of availability. You can use the Cinemacrops in any cave you want, because it's on your back. Cinemacrops are by far the weakest creature in this video. Their health pool is 15 times smaller than the Beelzebufo, and it doesn't get an armor rating from the saddle, but none of that matters because it's on your back and you tank for it. If you use the Cinemacrops properly, you can avoid all threats in every single cave in the game, no question. The only exception to this, of course, is underwater caves because you can't use the Cinemacrops abilities underwater. If you're going in with just Cinemacrops, you want to have a good set of flak on you, you want to have a weapon so you can kill stuff like Onyx that might attack, and you need to be ready at all times and pretty much never be on the ground for too long. Being on foot in a cave that's dangerous for too long at any point is just a high risk no matter how strong your gear is. The reason it's so good is because on something like a crouch cave, you can't bring any creature in, especially an official where you can't use the cryopods. So this is by far the best thing you can bring into those caves to avoid a ton of the threats. The Cinemacrops is one of 2 creatures in the game that can fly inside of caves, and that ability is nowhere near fair. Even in caves where you can bring other creatures though, if you have a Cinemacrops on your back just as a failsafe plan in case that creature dies, you have a way better chance of succeeding. It's also really accessible, you can find it on a ton of the areas on Lost Island, you can see the pop up on screen now for where they spawn. They're very easy to tame with chitin, so you just want to get one as soon as possible whenever you're playing the game, and they're really a great choice for caves. The only reason they're not higher is because they require a lot more skill to use than the creatures that are above it on the list, but these are extremely good and could easily be in the top 2 if you know how to use it. Before I get into the top 5, here's 4 honorable mentions. The first honorable mention is just running a cave on foot. Like I just mentioned, a lot of the caves in the game have crouch areas where you can only get in with your own character, but even in caves where they don't force you to tackle it by foot, sometimes that's the best choice. Kits with grapples, parachutes, flippers for underwater caves, and a really good shotgun plus flak is usually good enough to run by pretty much any cave. A lot of really good players will simply never bring cave creatures, they'll just grapple around threats or they'll just kill everything on their way. It's really not insanely difficult if you're experienced. My second honorable mention is the Otter. The Otter isn't included in the ranking because I'm really ranking more mounts. I know this is kind of ironic because I put the Cinemacrops in there, but I view them very differently. The Otter is great because it gives you heavy insulation bonuses, and it can hold multiple of the same artifact, which is a unique ability to the Otter. is just a really useful bring for a lot of caves in the game, but I found it pretty hard to rank compared to creatures that are either being ridden through caves or being used to avoid things in caves. It would definitely be towards the top though, just because of how universally good it is. One more quick plug for this video. If you think the otter is cute and you want to support the channel, I've recently opened a channel membership. Members get to vote on video ideas, get access to these 6 cute emotes you can see on screen, get shoutouts at the end of all my videos, and much more. If you want to check it out to help the channel, it's in the second link in the description, and I'd appreciate it a ton. My last honorable mention is the Allosaurus and Therizino for the exact same reason. Both are really strong, and both are too big for way too many caves to be on the list. If we're ranking creatures just off how strong they are and how they can beat a certain few caves, yes, the Allo and the Therizino are incredibly powerful, and in the caves they can actually fit into, they are great choices. They just can't fit into so many caves in the game that I didn't think they deserved a top 20 spot. At number 5, I have the Dinopithecus. The Dinopithecus has good stats, has a climbing ability that's not that great, has a really great jumping ability, is able to slam on the ground, and has multiple projectiles including poop-infused grenades. It's also equipped with a pack bonus, gets armor by putting a helmet on it, which lets it have a way higher ceiling in terms of armor compared to most creatures. This is because helmets can simply get a much higher armor rating than any saddle can. And it's overall just a really versatile, fast, and not a super large hitbox creature. It's just a really good choice. The Dinopithecus is basically a boss viable creature in terms of strength that can fit into most caves. The only downsides for me is that it's kind of clunky sometimes. The climbing ability really isn't great, especially for the caving side of the game, because you never really need a semi-mediocre vertical climb. And the pack bonus on this thing is kind of overrated too, because if you're jumping around the cave on a Dinopithecus, the other Dinopithecus that you brought with you are going to have a really hard time keeping up with you. So the pack bonus for this is just not as consistently good as something like the Direwolf from earlier in the video. And although the hitbox is pretty small, especially compared to how strong this thing is, it just doesn't fit into as many caves as my top 4. The taming process is also really kind of obnoxious in my opinion. It's not too bad, and you don't have to put a saddle on it, so once you get one, you can use it throughout the entire game. But accessibility is really not the Dinopithecus' strength either. At number 4, I have the Deinonychus. The Deinonychus is definitely my favorite creature on the list, but it's not the best of the best in terms of caving. Its strengths include an insanely high speed, being really maneuverable, having a great pack bonus, dealing good bleed, and having a really great jumping ability with a decent climb. The only major downside for the Deinonychus is its low HP pool, but if you have it in a pack, this mitigates this flaw really heavily. You're able to get a Deinonychus saddle unlocked at level 32, so it's really easy to use it throughout the entire game. And its bleed effect works on mini bosses as well, so you can use it on the Broodmother that's outside of the Spider Cave on Valguero to burn through it. The only other minor downside for the Deinonychus is the climbing isn't amazing in terms of stamina efficiency. You can use it decently effectively inside of caves, but I personally just use the really good speed and good jumping ability instead because it's much better. The reason the Deinonychus is 4th instead of the top 3 is simply because the top 3 pretty much have no weaknesses when this does have one weakness, which is a decently low HP. At number 3, I have the Desmodus. The Desmodus is absolutely broken. Honestly, I'm probably putting it too low. The Desmodus' strengths include a very strong lifesteal ability, flying in caves, a hover mechanic which makes it as maneuverable as a Tapajara, a dive bomb mode, latching onto walls, an echolocation ability, invisibility at night and when it's latched, allowing riders to use weapons while riding on the back of it. Yet again, this is a flyer, night vision, and pretty solid stats. So you might be thinking, how the hell is this thing not first? The only seriously unavoidable weakness for the Desmodus is if a cave has any underwater portion. The creature is obviously a flyer and you can't use it underwater, so this does completely bottleneck it for those specific caves. Its HP pool is also a bit low, but you really shouldn't be getting hit when you're on the back of this. There's so many OP abilities. You can also use weapons on the back of it to kill anything that might even be a threat to you. So as long as you understand this thing's kit pretty well, the HP pool is not a big deal. The saddle unlock is at level 74, and the taming method is pretty similar to the Bloodstalker, so it's not too bad. The Desmodus is simply one of the best flyers in the game, and the fact that you can use it in caves is completely insane. The only reason it's not in the top 2 is just because it lacks the versatility of being able to be used in underwater sections. At number 2, I have the Thylacoleo. The Thylacoleo has an amazing bleed, has a higher speed than almost every other creature on the list, jumps incredibly high, is insanely tanky especially for its size, and has a very solid climbing ability for verticality, which helps a lot in certain caves. The Thyla is one of the tankier creatures on the list, and with how small it is, it's insanely valuable for the tankiness you get. Just like the Deinonychus, it has an insanely good bleed effect, which makes it do a ton of damage, and on top of the great bleed damage it gets, it also has a really high melee damage stat, so it does even more damage than the Deinonychus. It's a knockout tame from the redwoods, which is kind of annoying because it can jump you, but the saddle requirement is only level 51, so you can have it for most of the game. The reason I have it over the Desmodos is because it can swim underwater, so for certain caves that have small underwater sections, the Thyla can still get the job done. The only other downside for it is that it is more annoying to tame than a lot of the creatures on this list, but the size of it is not a big deal. It fits into pretty much every cave you'll want it for. The Thyla is amazing for caving, but there is one creature that's just a little bit better. At number 1, I have the Baryonyx. The Baryonyx is absolutely incredible for caving. Let's start with the strengths for the Baryonyx in land caves, and then I'll get into the underwater section after. On land, the Baryonyx is fast, has a narrow frame which lets it fit into basically every cave in the game, has a very strong damage output, is able to jump, and is basically just designed to handle both caves with really tough enemies and caves that have more of a platforming challenge. It's also really easily able to handle underwater caves or land caves with underwater portions. Underwater, the Baryonyx is equipped with a stun tail ability which lets you stun enemy creatures for 10 seconds. This doesn't work on giant underwater creatures like Mozos or Tuzos, but it does work on small stuff like Zephactinus, which is super helpful. The Baryonyx has unlimited oxygen just like the frog. When you dismount it underwater, it doesn't float up to the surface, it stays down there with you, and it's a really fast swimmer, so you can avoid a lot of threats. The only downside for the Baryonyx underwater is that it doesn't have quite enough HP to deal with the super strong stuff. For example, an Alpha Moza could wreck your day, or eels or jellyfish could stun you. But besides these very niche situations, the Baryonyx is great for every single cave. In my opinion, besides very difficult underwater caves like the hard underwater cave on the island, which is very commonly filled with Alpha Tuzos or Alpha Mozas, you're essentially good to go to use the Baryonyx on any cave in the game, including fully underwater caves that aren't incredibly difficult. Just due to the versatility alone, the Baryonyx gets first place. It's made for caves, it's easily the best creature for caves in the game, and it's absolutely the creature you should tame if you're looking to tame one creature to solve all your caving needs. You can find it really easily in the swamp on pretty much any map. The saddle requirement's only level 49, so it's just a really easy knockout tame. It's very worth your time, and unless you're trying to fight really strong underwater creatures or eels, nothing is going to slow you down. Well, that's my list of the 20 best cave creatures in Ark. Thank you to my members for making these videos possible. If you enjoyed this video, I guarantee you that you'll enjoy the video linked on screen now, which ranks the 15 hardest items to get inside of Ark. See you there. Peace.